Why existence has no permanence? Any existence is impermanent. Rarely anyone would disagree with this statement, at least today, or at least in my experience. I am from a Hindu background, and very much of our philosophy or philosophies are based around this statement, or a fact. The Hindu philosophy or philosophies at certain point even questions and argues whether the Brahman, that is deemed the ultimate reality, and the permanent is also impermanent. If I am wrong about it, then at least now I am not, as I have, as a Hindu, discussed it. Now, one way to go is to say that the question, which is also the title of this video or audio, has the answer itself, which is to say that the answer to this question is that the reason that existence has no permanence is that the existence has no permanence. So existence having no permanence is an axiom, and there is no underlying layer of reason that serves as a much more fundamental and basic statement to this fact or statement, stating that existence has no permanence. The other way is that there be an underlying more fundamental layer or layers to this statement about existence having impermanence. In this case, we could put some other statement or statements as more fundamental, and which may be argued has a deeper and deeper layers of statement or statements as the more fundamental statement or statements. Now in this context, this one layer deeper or basic than existence not having permanence or permanence not having existence could be pondered upon. So let's consider this. Consider now the statement that states, quote unquote, nothing is permanent, not even nothing. This means that everything that quote unquote is, that is, that exists, is impermanent or temporary. This statement also states that only impermanence is permanent. So the only thing that is permanent is impermanence. But this is only if we view the statement from within the space defined by this statement. From outside, this statement comes in question. Or we could say that from outside, this statement can be viewed as stating that even itself, and thus even impermanence, is not permanent. These are the limits or boundary or border of this statement. And this statement, like any statement, is itself the border and defines the space and separates the space from the rest. When approached from within the space it defines, it is like approaching from left hand side as opposed to right hand side. And the statement that serves as the basis of this space is not in question, and there is no contradiction. But as this statement or border is approached, the statement is applied to itself, and so the contradiction is observed. Because there is a border, and a space that does not agree with this space is experienced. Now border is the intersection of these spaces, and therefore there is contradiction, as that is what contradiction is, an intersection or border or limit of spaces. The border is at which both spaces exist and negate each other out, since the spaces are the not spaces or statements of each other. So in this context, or in the case of the statement considered, and which states that everything is impermanent, at the border, when approached from one reason to other, we experience that impermanence is permanent, and when approached from other reason to the one, even impermanence is not permanent. But there is more to impermanence not being permanent, and we shall come to that later again and consider about it further. So it really is a matter of which space you are in. Even this statement that I just stated right now about it all being a matter of space or frame or basis one is in, has a space defined and no longer is true outside that space. that is no longer applies in the space or spaces out of that space. Same is true for any statement or state and for any space, even logic space. Now consider statement quote unquote impermanence being impermanent, or statement quote unquote impermanence is not permanent. For this to be true, impermanence should cease to exist at some point and permanence should begin. Now, when I say begin or end or refer to a point, it does not necessarily refer to space, where space and time as one of the bases. Space being our ordinary space and time being our ordinary time. It does not necessarily have to be those. Now, even in this context of impermanence disappearing and permanence beginning, there is impermanence. So impermanence is present. So a statement that impermanence being impermanent does not seem to define any space. This statement contradicts itself, but so does every statement when looked or observed from space or spaces that the statement does not define, as that statement would define a space outside this space or frame from which it is being observed. And because this space from which the observation is being made is not what it defines, it is a not of that statement and space defined by that statement. So obviously, that statement defining that space outside the space of observer is a not of the observer's space of being, and therefore does not agree and therefore is contradictory. But there is a space that a statement defines from which the observation made would not make the statement contradictory. But in case of a statement stating quote unquote impermanence being impermanent, there seems no space that it defines or founds or forms the basis of, from within which the observation that it is not contradictory seems to be realized. In other words, the space this statement defines or founds cannot be gotten into. It is a space from within which no observation can be made, no experience can be experienced. The space it defines is non-existent, i.e., is a point space. In other words, this statement or space is a border that can only be approached from space or spaces that is not of this space and cannot be approached from within this statement or space itself, as this statement or space is a point space, and moving within a point is inexperienceable. In non-point space, the border or limit of that space can be approached, as such space or spaces are bigger than the infinitesimal limit. Or in case of point space, the border or limit of that space cannot be approached, as such space or spaces are smaller than the infinitesimal limit, that is, 0 is less than infinitesimal, represented by a Greek letter epsilon. Now, one can be in that point space, but then the one is not one, and thus cannot be in that point space. This is because the point space is a border and therefore contradictory, as it defines not just one space, but space or spaces. And because one or the observer is a frame or space or defines a frame or space itself and is a definition or statement or state itself, it cannot be in or experience border, as border is an intersection of definitions, is contradiction, and is indefinition or indefiniteness. And definition cannot experience or be indefinition, as it is and can only experience the definition that defines it or that it itself is. Now border and a point as well is indefinition, which is also all definitions, or at least all definitions that intersect at the border or point. So the point space, as defined by the statement stating quote-unquote impermanence being impermanent, exists as well, and does not too, like any such borders or points. So we have a statement stating quote-unquote impermanence is impermanent that defines a space which cannot be experienced by an experiencer or observer or any definition, as this space is indefinition or indefiniteness. But the space defined by statement stating quote-unquote permanence is impermanent is experienceable, as it is not a point space. Or consider space defined by statement stating quote-unquote existence is impermanent. This space is not a point space, and so can be experienced. This statement that states quote-unquote existence is impermanent is a manifestation of the statement stating quote-unquote permanence is impermanent. And this statement that states quote-unquote permanence is impermanent obviously defines a space that is not point space and is larger than infinitesimal, as it's not a statement that states quote-unquote impermanence is impermanent, or the not statement that states quote-unquote permanence is permanent is or defines space that is point space, which is smaller than infinitesimal, represented by Greek letter epsilon, as point space is the smallest. Therefore, space defined or constructed by a statement of permanence being impermanent is experienceable, and its not statement of impermanence being impermanent is not experienceable. Therefore, space defined by a statement stating quote-unquote existence is impermanent is experienceable and is experienced, and therefore it quote-unquote is. Hence, quote-unquote existence is impermanent. Hence, existence is impermanent. Thank you.